Hi there, I'm Wendy and welcome to my channel Wendy Poole Designs, and today's knitting video is an introduction to circular knitting, showing you how to knit in the round using a circular needle. Now I'm going to cover three things in this video. I'm going to show you how to actually connect up your knitting into the round so you can start your circular knitting. I'm going to show you how I use stitch markers when I'm using circular needles, and then I'm also going to show you what to do if you need to decrease stitches and you find that your needle is actually too long for you to continue knitting in the round as normal, and I'll show you the magic loop method. Now, I'm a big fan of circular needles and I use them virtually all the time now, and you can use them just for straightforward knitting, going backwards and forwards in rows. But today's video isn't about that, it's about the circular knitting, so we'll get straight on with that. Now, just as an example, the jumper here was knitted from the bottom up and the main body of the jumper was knitted using a circular needle. Then I carried on with the same circular needle when it came to the shoulder part of the yoke, and then as the yoke got narrower, I then switched into the magic loop method where I needed a shorter needle but I didn't have one. So I then just transferred straight into using the magic loop method. So that's why I'm going to show you how to do that so that you can just comfortably knit larger and smaller circumferences as you need to. So on that note, the next video I'm releasing will be all about the magic loop method, and we'll be casting on with the magic loop method in that video. So if you want to use the magic loop for starting top down jumpers or for knitting the cuff areas on jumpers, things like that, that will be perfect for you. But for now, just quickly before we start, if you're new to my channel, then don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you get to hear when my new videos and updates go live. And if you enjoy this video, it would be lovely if you gave me a thumbs up as well. But now we'll get straight on, bring the overhead camera in and start our circular knitting. Today I'm going to be using a 6mm circular needle, and that's 80 centimetres in length, and that's 80 centimetres from the tip of one end of the needle to the tip of the other end of the needle. And along with that I've got some standard UK weight chunky yarn. I'm also going to be showing you using 2 ring style stitch markers, and I've got 3 of these padlock or lobster claw style stitch markers as well. But if you haven't got that, you can always improvise just by making 2 loops from a different shade of yarn, and you can always thread a spare piece of yarn through if you haven't got a padlock style stitch marker. Now, just before we start our circular knitting, it's important to be aware that when you're working circular knitting in the normal method, you need to have enough stitches that will stretch all the way around your needle from the tip at one end to the tip at the other end, so that you can connect your work and comfortably knit. And you can see what I mean here with this example where the stitches don't reach all the way around to the other end of the needle. So my 2 alternatives here would be to use a shorter needle or to use the magic loop form of knitting, which we're going to look at a little bit later in this video. Now, I've already cast on 90 stitches on my circular needle, and I've used the long tail method of casting on. Now, it really doesn't matter whether you use the long tail method or the cable method of casting on. And if you need a little refresher, I'll pop 2 links above here now and in the description notes below with running through casting on for you. When you're going to join your work into the circle, it's very easy for your cast on edges to just twist around the needle. And if you do that and you've joined your work with a twist, then it's impossible to remove that. You have to undo your knitting. So I normally suggest to anybody new to circular knitting to work the first row of their pattern just straight on the straight needle first before connecting into the round, because this just makes it a little bit clearer for you to see, and it will help prevent you from twisting this cast on edge before you connect up. So I'm going to knit 1 row now in a knit 1 purl 1 rib, and I'll meet you back here to connect up our work. So I've now knitted this row, and you can see because it's created almost like this ribbon-like band underneath the needle, I'm less likely to accidentally create a twist with this. So if I twist this round, it's actually quite obvious to see. So that's the first row completed, and I've also placed one of my padlock stitch markers in the middle of the center 2 stitches, and that's just so that I can see exactly where the halfway point is. So I'm now ready to join my work, and I'm going to move the needles so that both of the tips are pointing in the right hand direction, and my working yarn is on the back needle. So I'm just having a final check, and I've got no twists or kinks in my stitches sitting on the cable. And what I'm going to do now is to take one of those padlock style stitch markers and connect these 2 layers together. So I want to be careful that I don't catch the working yarn, the yarn that's going to my ball of wool, into that padlock needle. So I'm just going to pop it through a stitch or so in. So I'm going to take it through the front stitches and then through the work on the back needle and connect that together. And this is where, if you didn't have a padlock style stitch marker, you could just take your scrap of yarn and just run that through and then just tie it and then remove it a little bit later. So I'm going to take that out for now because we don't need it. And so I've got my working yarn on that back needle, and now I can just bring my needles round and I'm ready to start knitting, and I know everything's intact. So I'm doing this 1 by 1 rib, and just before I start working now, I'm just going to pop a little ring stitch marker there so I know that is the beginning of my round. So I'm going to just start knitting till I get to that halfway point, and I'm going to put another stitch marker in there, and I'll explain that and show you why when I get there. So I'll just carry on knitting this, and I'll see you in a mo when I get halfway around this next round. So I've now reached the halfway point of the round where I put the padlock stitch marker, and I'm going to pop another ring stitch marker on my needle here, and this is so that if for any reason I want to go into magic loop knitting, I know exactly where my halfway point is as well as the beginning of the round. So now I'll just continue knitting all the way till I get back to the beginning of the round, and I'll meet you there. So I'm back at the beginning of the round again, and it's all quite straightforward. We just slip that ring stitch marker from the left needle to the right needle, and then we continue with our knitting. Now I normally leave this padlock marker in until I finish my project, to be quite honest, but in this instance I'm going to remove it and show you how working that 1 row straight didn't really make any difference, because when I take my tail end and just sew it in, it connects everything up and nobody would know that you worked 1 row straight first before connecting into the round, and that is now all secure. So another thing that I just wanted to show you is that as I'm actually working, I always move my padlock stitch marker up just underneath my needles on both sides. And that's simply so that if by any chance these ring stitch markers fall off the needle, I've got something to indicate where to pop that stitch marker back to get it into the right place. So I just usually move them up every 5 rows or so that they're underneath the ring stitch marker. So we'll now take a look at what to do if you've decreased some stitches and you've suddenly found that your circular needle is too long and you need to start converting into knitting using the magic loop method. Hello, and I'm back, and I've now knitted a few more rounds on my circular needle. I've decreased some stitches in the last couple of rounds, making this needle now too long for me to comfortably knit with. If I try to continue knitting in the round just as it is on the circular needle, I'm going to start really distorting the stitches and stretching them. So the other thing that I've done is that I've moved my stitch markers up as well, and that's at the beginning of the round and halfway around. And you'll see when I'm showing you this method in a minute how useful it is, because if these little ring stitch markers fall off the needle, you can see exactly where to pop them back. So let's take a look at doing this magic loop. Now the first thing I'm going to do is go to the halfway point of the round and pull the cable through. So I'm going to split my knitting in half. So I'm going to pull through a loop. Then I can turn my work. I've got the loop on the left hand side and I've got my needle tips pointing to the right hand side. Now it's very easy for your ring stitch marker to fall off at this point. So I'm just going to take it off for a second and I'll pop it back on. So then it's almost like a push and pull action. You always make sure that the needle at the front has the stitches pushed up to the needle tip. So I'm pushing these up, and then the needle at the back is the one that you then pull out. So you've got a nice loose cable on the back needle on the right hand side. You've got the stitches pulled up to the tip on the front needle, and then you've got this loop at the side here. And then the next thing that we want to be sure of is to make sure that our yarn is going to the back of our work. Now if you're working the knit stitch, you always want the yarn to the back of the work, and if you're going to work a purl stitch, you can have the yarn to the front. But as we're working the knit stitch, the yarn is going to go to the back behind all of my work and over that cable. So now I'm just going to pop my stitch marker back on, and I can knit across the front half of these stitches. So just as normal, I've got a nice loose needle here and I'm just going to knit across to the other side. Okay, so I've now reached the other side of my work, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it all around so that the needle tips are both pointing in the right hand direction again. And then I'm going to pull my loop back and push all my stitches up to the tip of the front needle. So now I'm going to pull my back needle out. So that's going to the right hand side. And I'm ready to knit again. So I'm going to make sure that I take my working yarn over the back of my back needle because I'm working a knit stitch, and then I'm just going to slip my stitch marker across from the left hand needle to the right hand needle, and I can just knit across to the other side of my work again, and I'll be back at the beginning of the round, so I'll meet you there. So I've finished knitting across those stitches. So again, I'm just going to turn the whole thing around so that my needles are pointing in the right hand direction. And then pull out my loop on the left hand side. And now pull all the stitches up to the tip of the front needle. And pull out the back needle. So I'm back to that same position again where I've got a loop on the left hand side and I've got both my needles pointing to the right hand side, and I've got the stitches on the front of my needle up to the tip, and I've got the loose cable coming from the back needle, and I'm going to make sure that my yarn is coming over the top and down behind because my first stitch is going to be a knit stitch. Now I'm going to knit a couple more rounds and I'm going to drastically reduce the amount of stitches that I've got on here and come back again, just so that you can see how you can work the magic loop method with just a few stitches on a long cable needle. So I'll see you in a bit. So I'm back again and I've done some very drastic decreasing, and that's so that I can show you exactly the whole process working the magic loop method. So what we need to remember is that we always have the loop on the left hand side. We always push the stitches on the front needle up towards the tip, and we always pull the needle at the back out, pointing in the right hand direction. And then finally, we always make sure that that yarn is going over the back of the needle if we're going to work a knit stitch. And the reason that I keep saying that is if you don't do that, you can easily create an extra stitch or a loop at the side of your work. So I'm just going to knit across these stitches. It's good that there's only 5 stitches. Makes it nice and quick. So I finish that, I turn everything around so that my needles are pointing in the right direction, and I pull the front needle back so that I'm bringing the stitches up to the tip on my needle, and then I pull the back needle out so that I've got the working cable free. And then I make sure that that yarn goes over the back of that cable if my first stitch is going to be a knit stitch. So again, I'm just going to slip my stitch marker across, and then I'm just going to knit across to the other side. So I've knitted to the other side. Everything's pointing to the left. I'm going to turn it all around so that both of my needles are now pointing towards the right hand side. And then I'm going to pull my front needle back. So I'm just going to pull that cable back. So I take the stitches up to the tip of the needle, and then I pull that back needle out. And that is how you continue working the magic loop method. So I'm just going to pop my yarn over the back of the cable, and I'm ready to go again. So don't forget that the next video, which will be out in the next few days, is going to be all about the magic loop, and we'll be starting off from a cast off edge working the magic loop method. And just before I go, don't forget to watch the end to see my little 4-legged friend sitting on the settee behind me. But for now, I'll just say thanks for watching me, happy knitting, and I'll see you soon. Bye. So in the intro for my new video, I had a little guest appearance just sneaking away in the background. So here he is, Spot the dog. He was having a lovely time.